Will you welcome with me Christina Willings to our pulpit?
Oh man, I'm going to be bawling before I've even started. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have already been bawling. Who am I trying to kid tonight? So, and I'm not sure which way to stand. I don't want to put my back to anybody. I love you all, you know, just. So I'm so delighted and so honored to be here in such a wonderful, wonderful house of all that is divine. And all that is human. And all that brings those two together in such fabulous harmony and correction. Right? Man. It's funny because when people at home were asking me what I was doing this weekend, I said, well, I'm going to San Francisco and I'm going to speak. You know, I started telling people actually a little while ago that I had this speak coming up and it was fabulous. And it took me a while to several times of reading the email to realize that there was a different S word in the email that was actually sermon. You know, it was like, oh, fuck. And excuse me, you know, it's all holy, right? It's all holy. So yeah, so I'm so happy to be here, and I'm really, really happy to have public opportunity to honor Mary Daly. And I'm sure she's very well known to some of you and maybe less well known to others of you. And she's very much a part of my coming into myself as a woman, as a lesbian, as a spiritual being, reclaiming that part of myself. And part of my survival, really, to be totally blunt about it, you know. And so I'm so happy to be able to honor her passing. What a fabulous being. I am going to tell you a bit about myself, which it hadn't occurred to me to do. Before my partner, Julie, the wonderful Julie, said to me, well, you're going to tell your story, aren't you? And I just went, oh, man, no. I'm British, you know. We just really don't go on about that kind of thing, you know. It's just, it's done, I'm fine, you know. It's all good, right? I'm more comfortable in, like, you know, rhetoric and, you know. So I am going to tell you about myself because she said, well, come on, honey, we're Americans. We love that shit. So. And I love it, too. Who doesn't love to be witnessed, right? Don't we all? So I did grow up in an evangelical Christian family. My father, in fact, who was a doctor in his regular life, was also a lay minister. So this is a huge full circle kind of healing for me to be in the pulpit here today, and thank you so much for allowing me to be here. You know, I'm really kind of making peace with my DNA here. Yeah. I fell in love with a woman, not nearly as deeply as I'm in love with you, sweetheart. I was only 19, but to the degree that I was able, I truly did fall in love with a woman at the age of 19, kind of 19, 20, just as Mary Daly was helping me make my journey out of the church that I had been brought up in. I'm so happy that I had the feminist movement in the left and the lesbian movement. Really, for me, it was the feminist movement to come out into, to have some kind of cushion. Without that, I don't know where I would be, and so I'm grateful. But as a young lesbian, not yet out to my parents, either as a non-Christian or a lesbian, and really they held equal weight, I spent hours in church pews with my parents who'd come down to see me kind of on, half terms from university or whatever. And I'd go to church because I wasn't quite willing to say, oh, no, not, So I would spend hours in church pews running a mantra through my head to deflect what I imagined was God's disapproval of me at the time. It was kind of an attempt to put up my own force field to shield me from being wounded. By the messages of shame and guilt, that just seemed to be seeping into me out of the pews. The mantra was, I am a radical lesbian feminist. 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 And it was a shield for me. Yeah, it was, I don't believe what you believe. I believe what I believe. And in my world, I am okay. It was a lot of work, and that was how I protected myself early on. I don't need your dogma, and here's the catch for me, I have a new one. And I always did say, I had enough insight to say I don't want to just trade one dogma for another, I don't want to do that, I had that much insight into fundamentalism and how I'd been wounded by it, but because I didn't really know how to feel yet, how to really be fully human and connected to spirit, I did it anyway because, the neural pathways were carved. I knew how to do ideology, and so I dumped one set and filled it up with something else. And became a fundamentalist feminist, really. And it was part of my journey, I have 3 hours up here, right? Okay, just kidding, I promise I won't. But I'm getting kind of ahead of myself, actually. So what actually happened when I came out to my parents was that they freaked out. They were otherwise really reasonable people. They were smart and sensitive and pretty well developed, in terms of their own exposure to the world, and they were quite intellectual and all of that stuff. But they had a fear of going to hell. And the giving over of their power to an external authority that could send them to eternal damnation meant that they could fragment into fundamentalist fanaticism, right? So they came to Vancouver for their own little jihad. And I don't want to trivialize, what's going on, or the word jihad, or terrorism, but for me, I really did have a fear for my survival in some deep way. I didn't think they were going to kill me, but I had a fear for my survival. They came to Vancouver where I was living, and they convinced my landlord to let them into my apartment. And I came home with my best friend at about 1 a.m., We were in our early 20s, and I found them in my home, rifling through my stuff, scouring my books, and finding everything they were looking for, and reading my journal. So I ran downstairs and I screamed at my landlord, because it was easier to scream at my landlord, right, and get all that fire going and then come back up, for letting them in, and then, ousted my parents with some difficulty, but did it, and yeah. Anyway, so then after that, I decided I was leaving, and I wasn't going to tell them where I was going. I was going to leave town. And so I went to see a lawyer and a psychiatrist, and I told each of them what had happened, that I had seen my parents in this kind of state once before, and I didn't know what they were capable of, and I needed somebody to know so that there could be some record, so that there could be a tracking of me of some kind, because my father had said he wanted to put me in secure treatment. So really happily for me, the lawyer that I saw happened to be Robin Tyler's cousin. And she, as many of you obviously know, is a well-known lesbian comedian and activist. And he said to me, Christina, my cousin told me, and I'd never had this thought before, really that what is so unique and so compelling about the kind of oppression that gays and lesbians experience is that we lose our families, potentially. Now, I'm not saying that that's not true of people who experience other kinds of oppression, but that's what he said to me, and I really needed to hear it. Certainly, we know people with different kinds of disabilities and different abilities are maltreated by their families, but I was really, that was profound for me, that witnessing. So I left. I was disowned and I was disinherited. And that was the beginning of my healing journey, really. You know? I left, and I knew that I was also burned out as a feminist, that I couldn't carry this fundamentalist kind of wavelength anymore. I just couldn't do it. You know, I was so vibrating, so in my head, trying to hold everything together, you know, and had this like slot. Okay, this goes there, this goes there. Just sort of, you know, fitting my experience into a belief system instead of living and allowing what I knew to come forward. That I just knew that I had way too many answers and not enough questions. And I would say that to my friends. They would say, "Why on earth are you going to Calgary? There's nobody there. There's no feminists. There's no dykes. There's like no culture. It's like a stampede." And, you know, I just said, "Look, I don't know why, but my sister is there," which was big, and it feels like space. And I may be able to learn something else. So the gift was that I began to open and deepen to myself and to heal. And I needed to go inside and find my own authority, finally. So 20 or so years later, a friend of mine who lives in the UK for part of the time and in Canada for part of the time sent me a link to a Manchester Guardian article that was about the ex-gay movement and a resurgence of the ex-gay movement in response to a study that had been published by Robert Spitzer that many of you are probably familiar with. He was a psychiatrist who didn't really lead the charge, but was the last person to get it over the hurdles it needed to clear to get homosexuality removed from the DSM-3 in 1973. And then he published a study in 2001 saying that he felt that some highly motivated homosexuals could perhaps change a core aspect of our beingness and could change our sexuality. And so, of course, the right leapt on that with its familiar fervor. Here was a secular study by an atheist psychiatrist, so it really must be right and you can't refute it now. Anyway, so there was this whole resurgence, and the Manchester Guardian was covering it, and this is where I first learned about the Love in Action programs and the live-in programs for people to be reoriented and all of the stuff that everybody is so familiar with. But I hadn't really been, and I thought, oh my God, it's still happening. This is the stuff that my parents wanted to do to me, and here it is. And it's still going on. And not only that, but it's happening here in Canada, right? It's one thing, you know, I skipped a bunch of stuff and that's completely fine. So it was happening here. and you know, the land of the reasonable, supposedly, right? Or at least of the very sedately passive-aggressive. Which is, I think, a little more accurate. I mean, you know, so many of us were British before we were Canadian, after all. So, and we were just about to pass same-sex marriage legislation, for God's sake, you know? But when I went to the Exodus website online and passed my cursor over Canada, the lights lit up all over the country. And that showed me that there were storefront ministries in every single province, many storefront ministries in every single province, operating completely under the radar. And nobody was talking about it. And I just thought, where is everybody? Where is me in my 20s, you know? Where are the people talking about all this stuff? Why am I not hearing about it, about this upsurgence? And I started to do the research, and it really grabbed me and wouldn't let me go. Because really my first response had been, oh man, I don't care. I'm not a Christian. You know, if those people are still struggling, let them deal with it. You know, I really had gone into the left in the women's movement, and I was just starting to reclaim it, but I had cut myself off from my spirituality because I didn't think I had a choice, right? So I really was kind of like, I don't want to go back there. Besides, I'm done with that, right? I really don't have any difficult feelings about this anymore. I didn't really ever actually deal with it because I really knew too much, you know, to have those feelings. But I certainly didn't really want to go there. So as I did this and I realized how prevalent it was, I really started to feel grabbed by it, and I felt then a sense of responsibility. When I was asking the question, who's talking about this, I got the answer, maybe me. I'm a filmmaker. I work in television. I produce stuff. I could get it financed. So I guess it's me. And so then I entered the process of making this film, which was another profoundly challenging journey. And it really, in some ways, it just so mirrored and furthered and deepened my healing from fundamentalism. Because the first response really the first thing I wanted to do was just to be angry. Before, when I'd been politically active, I was coming from this righteous, well, I felt it was a righteous rage position. I don't think it really was. I think it was just rage. But, you know, by that I mean there was kind of an indulgent quality to it and a flinging quality to it, you know? And I'm not bad, you are quality to it, right? I'm not saying the rage is inappropriate, but the behavior, perhaps, you know. So I didn't want to be coming from that place. I mean, at first I did. I thought, well, you know, it's ridiculous. I started doing research, and I saw these guys in storefront ministries surrounding themselves with cute gay guys in crisis, right? They were like holding court with their architectural glasses and their pressed shirts, and they were totally hot, you know? And they were surrounded by totally hot, cute guys who were really, really upset, you know? And I just, you know, it was obvious to me that I could really dig in and go for the laugh here. And that I could go for what I had experienced before as a political community, that I knew how to do that. But when I really sat with it, I knew that I had to try and carve a new channel. But I couldn't go there anymore. We've done that stuff, right? We've flung back at the people who have flung at us. And where, you know, it doesn't work, right? It's just more abuse, really. I didn't want to do what had been done to me. So it got harder after that. But it got better. And one of the things that helped me was I saw a presentation by a documentary filmmaker, a veteran for whom I have enormous respect, who's made over 37 films with his brother, and that was Albert Maysles. I saw him, he did Grey Gardens and Gimme Shelter and many other fabulous films. I saw him speak, and he said, "You can never make a film about people you cannot love." And I really felt that in my body, you know. And how could I love people who were making such stupid choices? Judgment again, right? But so this was the journey that I'd taken on for myself. And what I came to is they're only people. I decided to see people as they are, as we are, and love us all in our humanity, and to say, wow, this is what we do to ourselves and to each other here on the earth plane. This hospital plane where souls come to heal. And as I moved into that space of loving and bearing witness, the film became more and more a meditation on the nature of fundamentalism through the lens of sexuality. Sexuality became my way into the subject of fundamentalism. It became a meditation on the kind of fracturing of the self that fundamentalism requires, the disassociation that I had experienced, and less about making my point, less about being right and more about bearing witness to things as they are. In the process, I felt so much more of the pain that I had been too smart to feel when I came out. And the more I felt, the more powerful I felt. The more I had access to myself. and the more I had access to the divine and everything that could fuel me to do this project. So the process really mirrored my own process and furthered my own process of healing from fundamentalism. I needed to put the relationships with my subjects as I made them, as I created them over the 3 years that I was in touch with them, these real people. I needed to put the process before the ends, or at least make it equal. My experience of fundamentalism so often has been that the ends always justify the means. That was my experience in my family. You know, my parents were able to say, do all manner of things, like just be incredibly controlling because it didn't matter. They had a laser focus on the end, and as long as they got there, they couldn't even see the damage they were doing on the way. It was not actually, I should say, yeah, it's not even actually that they felt it was okay to do damage, they just were blind to it. And I didn't want to be blind to it, I didn't want to do it, and I just thought, you know, no more sacrifice for justice, right? No more sacrifice. I saw myself as doing what I could do instead to break the cycle of abuse. And not everybody likes the film. I'm so gratified that you guys do, those of you who do. Those of you who told me that you did, you know? In the film, John talks about, one of the subjects talks about being cast out and about being called a danger to the flock. And you know, there's something about that that chills me to my marrow. Because when ideology supersedes our lived experience, the love and the ability to be in spirit, it's really terrifying. One of my early interviews with Brent Hawkes, the senior pastor at Metropolitan Community Church in Toronto, and the first pastor actually to perform same-sex marriage in Canada, it told me something that really stayed with me as we were discussing the same-sex marriage debates. I actually wangled myself a press pass to the Supreme Court hearings on same-sex marriage and shot a lot of it and gotten shit because I was supposed to know where to stand and I didn't, and they it was really funny. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. Focus on the Family was there. They took out full-page ads in all of our national newspapers to stem the tide of anti-family practices in Canada. And they got themselves intervener status, which you guys called friend of the court status, to give their petition to the Supreme Court against same-sex marriage in Canada. I was a bit in a froth about sovereignty at that point. Anyway, so during this time I had a conversation with Brent Hawkes, and he said to me, you know, fundamentalists are scared of same-sex marriage because they know it will force families finally to choose between their family members and their dogma. Right? It's going to force that question. And what I've seen and what I'm seeing is the heart is opening in the church. Even the places that I went to do this film, there were people who were supposed to give big, long diatribes about the ugliness of same-sex love, who I just saw them get lost because they were trying to get love in there too, you know? And it wasn't working for them. You know, I feel a bit like Sarah Palin, actually. How's that hopey changey thing working for you? You know? Because nothing could stop the force of that when the heart opens and the Spirit comes in, right? Way off track, but I loved it. So the reason that the whole dangers of the flock thing terrified me too was that I really saw, I've been to Rwanda and I've spoken to the people there, and I know that that's the same kind of language that they taught when they were perpetrating genocide. That was what went out over the radios. Cull the flock, excise the cancer. It's the same thinking that we all know from all our many lifetimes. That's my perspective. And from all the many genocides, right? Including our own. And so the importance then is of the opening of the heart and the deepening of the self is now more than ever, as we all know. I don't need to tell any one of you that, you know, is so imminent. My experience as a child was that whatever came from the deepest places of myself had to be denied and papered over with rules. Exactly because it became from the deepest places of myself. You know? What a mindfuck. Not in a good way. And that's what happened because I was taught that who I was inherently sinful. And certainly not only that my sexuality was sinful, because this is way before that, right? But that who I was inherently sinful and needed to be fixed and needed to be subjugated, right? It's just a recipe for disaster, certainly for me, for intense dissociation. You know? And it strikes me that it makes sense to control the entire being, and especially the sexual urge, straight or gay, and that should be at the root of, excuse me, I'm going to say it, the institutional church's historic control of humanity over the millennia. Because it's exactly the surrender that lovers experience with each other, not ever, of course, to be confused with submission, but surrender. Well, let's not go into that. I'm talking about really giving up your power and your selfhood and your right to self-determination. That's what I'm talking about. So, never that to anyone, but surrender to a lover. It's that same surrender that's required for union with Spirit. That same surrender to Source or God. That same cosmic ecstasy. It's as if there's an understanding on the part of the institutional church and the historical church that if you can interfere with that mechanism of deep cosmic surrender, then you can interfere with the ability of humanity to deeply connect with Source. And then you're really in control. Because if we're cut off from ourselves at our deepest places and we're cut off from God, we will do almost anything to get that back. Usually starting with self-destructive urges, right? Because our self is the only vehicle we have here for connection and union with the divine. When I listen to many Christians, because sometimes I go to church with my 84-year-old mother now, because I don't need to change her, and I do love her, and so I do go to church with her, and it's interesting. Because I hear the Christians that she hangs out with talking about the yearning to walk with God. All of that craving and reaching out for something that seems so impossible and sounds so hard. They talk about it as if it's unattainable with such poignancy. It's because you can't experience the reality of that connection if you're at the same time subjugating every authentic experience of yourself. It's not true at every Christian, but when there is that ecstatic connection to Source, in that kind of Christian context, you'd better obey the dogma or you're going to lose it. And that's what we see. I mean, when I see the fundamentalist programming that sometimes is on TV, and I watch it because I'm curious, right? You did all of the hand raising and all of the things that in my mind are somewhat ritualistic, but also authentic impulses, because you can see that people are feeling filled with Spirit in some way. There is access to Spirit. There is something real going on, but what's also going on is, oh my God, I better obey all the rules so I don't lose this. And that's what's scary to me. The human has to be subjugated from the evangelical perspective. So what I feel now is that the ego needs to move aside and let Spirit shine forth. Not be subjugated, but just give room for Spirit to lead. And then we can say, like Mary Daly's flower, I am. From the deepest parts of ourselves. From the part of us that feels love and union with the divine. I know I'm repeating myself, opening to the divine as we would to a lover. From this position, I don't have to believe anything. I don't even need faith because I have deep experience, deep connection, I have deep knowing from inside. And from this position, I become the light that I am. And I fill and expand as I fill with the ecstasy of union with Spirit and with Source. And then I am the light. I am holding love consciousness here. And you are doing this, all of you here are doing this, and it's so beautiful to be with. And San Francisco, the city of love. I don't know what it is about this city or this geography, okay? But, I mean, you've been doing it since the 60s and before that time, we know that. I know it's all been kind of turned into a caricature of itself. You know, that human wounding has got in there and turned genuine breakthrough into kind of addiction and chaos and all kinds of other things, right? Led us off down all kinds of paths. Nevertheless, there was something there, and it is still here. And I thank you for it now, more than ever. Given what's happening with Prop 8, especially, and your role in pushing the consciousness of love out into the world. I loved reading Leah's words on the website this month. Well, her choice of Thoreau's words, and your own words, actually. But your choice of Thoreau's words, the only cure for love is more love. How perfect is that? And I remember reading Daly's words in Beyond God the Father. If you take the idea that humans are innately sinful and need saving out of Christianity, then the bottom falls entirely out. I am not evil. No one has to die for me. I am not guilty. I don't deserve to go to hell. I can be in union with the divine directly with no shame and no self-hate. One of the things that was really powerful and interesting for me when I was doing the research for my film was that I met so many people who had had visions. Visions of themselves in deep and stinking and ugly pits, variously covered in rags and chains and feces and all kinds of horrific stuff. So many people. And they all said that when they were down there, they had an experience of communion with the divine, that they had felt visited. However they saw that, most of the people saw Jesus come to them and say, I love you. Get out of this pit. And how they heard that was, this pit is who I am. And I got to climb out of who I am, because that's where Jesus wants to love me. And that just nearly broke my heart. When the real message was, the real contact was, in their hour of absolute despair. Buck up, little camper. You know? You are loved. You are loved no matter what. God, I'm feeling a little Baptist. It's funny, I'm tuning into something new. One of the wonderful things that my father said to me often when he was alive, and for all of the craziness that he did go into, he was one of the most wonderful people I have ever known, and I'm so grateful for him. One of the most wonderful things that he said to me often was, nothing can separate you from the love of God. And I know that it's biblical, and I don't remember the address. For me, that's what my dad said all the time. And he said, there is light and there is absence of light. Choose light. And as we as gay people who are refusing to deny our core experience of ourselves, we are choosing light. We are now also reclaiming our right to spirit, to walk in love and in union with God, and I, like you, have fought and clawed my way back to this, to the holiness that is my birthright, to full connection to myself and full union with the divine at the same time, to the degree that I am willing and able to feel and to surrender. full union with universal love consciousness. Again, I want to thank you all and MCC for helping to anchor this change of consciousness, for anchoring it for years and years and years, decades and decades, many of you before I was doing this work, that has brought and will bring change. You are truly the light of the world, and San Francisco is a city set on a hill that will not be hid. And I thank you for that. And in closing, this is something that I said this morning, and I just feel moved to say it to you again. You guys are really nice to when you remember us. You know? I mean, I know, you're big. There's a lot of people here. You don't need to think about us a lot, right? So it's all right. I don't mean that meanly. I just mean that, you know, we don't necessarily get a lot of attention. But when we do, we feel the incredible respect that you hold for us, you know? I know that. So many of you have said to me, we love Canadians. There's this kind of a fantasy that I don't often disabuse, but because I like it. But, you know, there's also something in it that's true. You seem to have such respect for us, you know? And you give us so much love and so much friendship. And I feel that. I feel honored as a Canadian when I come to the States. And I want to make a confession to you, in case you don't already know this. In general, we haven't done so very well at returning that favor to you. It's kind of a nasty, not-so-secret that really one of our last sanctioned prejudices up there is you know, anti-Americanism. It's okay for us to slag Americans. And I want to say, I'm sorry. I have had the most wonderful experiences here. And I find such a huge heart here. And I'm about to marry an American. And I think your country is wonderful, and I think its true position really is the heart of the world. America has a huge, throbbing heart, and I want to thank you for that. Thank you.